Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa nuqtata min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Apologies, this is the grave hour shift. It's almost 5 o'clock and everybody's sugar levels is about to drop, and I see some young, youths there. They're far more interested in grabbing a smash burger than listen to Ibn Khaldun speak. So I'll try and make it as interactive and entertaining or edutaining as possible. It's unfortunately, because of the nature of the topic, it requires getting into quite a number of complex kind of ideas. I'll try and make it as simple as possible, and if I fail to do so, please feel free to stick your hands up and say, look, you've just introduced a concept or an idea. I haven't got the foggiest what that means. I'm more than happy to actually respond as and then. Or you can wait until I've finished speaking, which is going to be around about 30 minutes, 20 to about 30 minutes, and we can open it up for question and answers. So that's the format of the day. Unfortunately, my day job is as an academic, so most of my time I'm engaging with either my PhD students or my master's students. I do teach undergraduates, but less and less over the years. So if I go into kind of full mode academia, please either yawn or give me some signals so I can shake it up a little bit. Okay, so Ibn Khaldun. For anybody who's traveled the world, even in particular North Africa, you will quite easily note that there's a number of streets that's named after Ibn Khaldun. If you go to Tunisia, you will find there's a big statue of Ibn Khaldun in Tunis. For those people who exchanging currency in Tunisia, you will find that there's some notes are actually have his kind of image there. There's also a number of schools and universities in Egypt where he's actually buried, has various kind of memorabilia associated with him. If you travel to America at the George Washington University, there's actually a chair, Ibn Khaldun chair. So in other words, there's a fully fledged Professor Akbar Ahmed, who holds the distinguished position as the chair of Ibn Khaldun. Boris Johnson recently, when he was the Prime Minister, he cited Ibn Khaldun to justify his neoliberal economic ideas. Reagan, the former president of America, was also cited Ibn Khaldun quite often and quite frequently. So the point then is, who is this Ibn Khaldun? Now, unlike the previous speaker, he was speaking about Ibn al-Arabi. Ibn Arabi is actually known throughout the Muslim world, for his work around kind of Sufism and Tasawwuf. Ibn Khaldun is one of the many figures that's basically known for his writing on social sciences. Yeah. So I'll be speaking to his ideas and work in relation to social science. That's quite interesting and quite important, really, because for the first time within contemporary discourse, you have Ibn Khaldun's name that's being mentioned that's associated with not theology, not religious studies, but rather sociology, economics, what else? Human geography, and various other kind of strands of philosophy, etc. So my interest in Ibn Khaldun actually stems from my study of sociology. So both my undergraduate, my master's and my PhD was actually in sociology, and that's how I actually come to take interest in the writings of Ibn Khaldun. And it's really important because when you have young generation of individuals who are studying the social sciences, whether it be psychology, whether it be geography, whether it be economics, whether it be history, whether it be politics, whether it be sociology, you need someone who speaks to you from your intellectual heritage. That's really, really critical. Because otherwise you end up going through a 3 years degree course And the only names that you basically hear within sociology is Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Emil Durkheim. Yeah. Within psychology, you have similar names as well, like Carl Rogers, Sigmund Freud, and various other individuals like that as well. So the point that I was trying to make in this book is that there are individuals within the Muslim world, yeah, that as Muslims that we can actually reach out to, that we can basically draw inspiration from, but also most critically, we can use the theoretical ideas as a way of informing the way in which we do sociology, in the way which we do kind of politics or history, etc. Yeah. So whenever you think of, say, for example, Plato, Aristotle, or Socrates, you don't necessarily think of these Greek philosophers as being dead and buried. You think of those individuals as if they are here with us in the present or in the moment. Yeah. In the same way that what I'm trying to do in this book is trying to say that, look, when it comes to studying sociology, when it comes to studying the political sciences, there are individuals that we can basically draw upon, yeah, that we can actually make relevance, that we can actually kind of hold kind of contemporary. You know, they're not necessarily dead individuals, but their ideas continue to kind of shape the way in which we think, and shape in the way in which we kind of understand the society that we basically live in. So that's basically the context of the book. Now, before I basically start off, I don't want to necessarily start with Ibn Khaldun, just a plug for the book. But I want to basically start off with the person that's translated the Muqaddimah. Yeah. And the person that translates the Muqaddimah is a Jewish individual by the name of Francis Rosenthal. Yeah. So Francis Rosenthal is a linguist. He basically sits down and translates the entire Muqaddimah. So the Muqaddimah is actually kind of translated and published in 1958. But I'm not interested in the Muqaddimah. I'll come back to the Muqaddimah later on. I'm interested in his book that he basically writes in 1970. Yeah? And the title of that book is called Knowledge Triumphant. The title of the book is Knowledge Triumphant, yeah? The role of knowledge, yeah, in medieval societies, Islamic societies. So that's the title of the book. The fascinating thing about that book is that he's interested in looking at what is one thing, one key aspect that basically unifies the Muslim world as far as medieval society is concerned. What is the one characteristics that you basically say that unites the Muslims, you know, during the medieval Islam? Yeah, was it culture? Was it art? Yeah, was it piety? Was it like tasawwuf? What was it? Yeah. So bearing in mind he's a non-Muslim, he's basically looking into the history, looking at the archival material, etc. And he basically concludes that there's only one unifying feature, that is ilm, that is knowledge. Knowledge is one characteristic that basically unites the Muslim societies within the medieval period. Now, I just want to ask a rhetorical question here. If it was the same sociologist that was basically writing now within contemporary society, and he or she was actually tasked with summarizing one key feature that basically unites the Muslim communities, what would that be? Yeah, I would struggle to basically say that it's going to be ilm, it's going to be knowledge. Yeah. The other thing that he basically mentions in this book is that Muslims were so engrossed in knowledge, they were preoccupied by knowledge. Yeah. Yet they had 52 different definitions of what knowledge was. Not necessarily one, but 52 different definitions of the knowledge. So he found it quite a complicated task to basically summarize these kind of approaches to knowledge. But he did achieve a kind of classification, if you like. So he basically said that you can reduce ilm or knowledge as Islam. Yeah. You can actually reduce knowledge as philosophy, intellectual sciences, yeah? Or you can actually summarize it as knowledge as light, like tasawwuf, etc. So it just gives you an idea in which how medieval Muslim societies basically approached knowledge in different ways. So that book was actually published in 1970. Yeah? Now move on from 1970 to the contemporary society. There's been a series of books that's been published on Muslim societies within the medieval society. Yeah. So if you take, say, for example, Osman Bakr, who's at Harvard University, his area of speciality is basically West Africa, Muslim West Africa. He writes his fascinating books called Beyond Timbuktu. yeah, in which he basically says that, look, Africa is a space, yeah, within medieval Muslim society, knowledge was actually at the heart of things. And the thing that I find really fascinating reading Osman Kane's book, sorry, that's not Osman Bakr, is from Malaysia, yeah, is that when it comes to hifz, yeah, we conventionally take an understanding of a hafiz is a person that's memorized the Quran. But within West Africa, it's not necessarily someone that's just memorized the Quran, but someone that's memorized the Quran but was able to actually write the entire Quran from memory. So can you see how you have the ranking, the classification of what constitutes the hafiz basically changes from one particular epoch to another. Yeah. So when, I guess, knowledge basically gets diluted, etc. Or you can pick up the 3-volume book by Salma Jayusi called The Legacy of Islam in Spain, and you will basically find that Islam within the Iberian Peninsula contributed significantly in the way in which knowledge and culture kind of flourished, if you like. Yeah. We had a really excellent presentation this morning, whose book is still available for you to purchase at the back, in which basically when the knowledge and Islam and Islamic reform is basically discussed in Southeast Asia. So the point that I'm trying to kind of get across is that it's not just necessarily Francis Rosenthal that's basically just identifying the key characteristics of knowledge within society, but rather knowledge as how it's being understood and translated throughout the Muslim world. Yeah. So that's my kind of perhaps my starting point. So quickly just moving on to who Ibn Khaldun was. Okay. So Ibn Khaldun was basically a product of his time. Yeah. So he's basically writing around, around about the 15th century. So the thing about Ibn Khaldun is that it turns this hypothesis that a number of people actually have, yeah, that the doors of knowledge and the doors of ijtihad was actually closed, yeah, in the 12th century with Imam al-Ghazali. What you basically find with Ibn Khaldun and various other figures that was basically writing after that period is that the contribution to knowledge, contribution to various other sciences, yeah, the legacy actually continued beyond, the death of Imam al-Ghazali. Yeah. But he was also a unique individual. Unique in the sense that he was not only a jurist, he was a Maliki jurist, yeah. Not only was a historian, not only was a sociologist, not only was an economist, yeah. Not only was he a judge, not only was he a political advisor, yeah. So there's very strands that's associated with his name, yeah. So the word that we basically use, the conventional word that basically, people use is what? Polymath. It was a polymath, yeah. So once again, if you pick up Peter Burke's book, say for example, he looks at the sociology of knowledge. If you pick that book up, one of the things that you basically find is that the role of the polymath within Western European societies. Yeah. So, but he has a small chapter there. He basically acknowledges that one of the greatest contributing forces to the role of polymath was being Muslims. Yeah, from the likes of Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and various other individuals like that as well. Yeah. So Ibn Khaldun was basically a polymath. Yeah. He was able to actually master a number of disciplines, and not only was he able to actually master a number of disciplines, he was actually made. He was able to actually contribute significantly to a range of disciplines as well. Moving to the second point that he basically writes a magnus opus with the title of Kitab al-Ibar, yeah, the Book of History. It's a 7-volume book. Yeah, the 7-volume book is actually available in the French language, and I'll tell you the reason why it's actually available in French much later on. But the Muqaddimah, the book that is much more famous for, constitutes the introduction of the Kitab al-Ibar and Book 1. Yeah, so the Muqaddimah is just basically the introduction and Book 1 to his magnus opus. Yeah, the 7-volume book. And when you read the Muqaddimah, there's a really good full English translation of it. There's also a kind of a partial abridged translation that most people actually kind of read, but I find it really, really difficult because it takes out the soul of Islam from the actual translation. And if you want, we can pick that discussions up, much later on during the question and answer. So the book is actually published, but it becomes a standalone text. The Muqaddimah becomes a standalone text even during the time of Ibn Khaldun's kind of a career. Later on, when Ibn Khaldun basically retires, he retires in Cairo, under the political kind of support of the Mamluk dynasty, and he teaches the Muqaddimah at Al-Azhar University. Yeah, so we know that the Muqaddimah is there. It's a standalone text. The Muqaddimah is very, very complicated to read. In fact, the language in which he basically writes, it's basically a scholarly text. It's not like, Ihya Ulumuddin, which is aimed for, the general audience. The Muqaddimah is written, for the kind of scholarly, the scholarly class, if you like. And if you're interested, like Bruce Lawrence has an article on this, on the style of writing. He calls it the Jahiz, is Ibn Jahiz. There's different ways in which, the scholars actually wrote their kind of writing, if you like. So it's there as a scholarly text. Unfortunately, throughout the Muslim world, the Muqaddimah isn't necessary. It doesn't actually it's not taking up. Yeah, in fact, I was having a conversation at Leeds University with a professor there, and she was basically saying, look, throughout the Muslim world, the Muqaddimah only became famous much later on after the French had actually translated, with the exception of one particular area, which is the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire basically has taken up with the writings of Ibn Khaldun. And particularly, there's a polymath called Khatib Chalabi. He basically kind of does a lot of kind of commentary on Ibn Khaldun's kind of writing. So Ibn Khaldun's writing basically is taken up by the French. The reason why it's taken up by the French is because the French actually colonized North Africa. So the Muqaddimah is basically there as a way of explaining the rise and fall of civilizations. Yeah, the Muqaddimah is basically aimed at what produces civilization, yeah, and what produces the decline of civilization. That's basically at the heart of what Ibn Khaldun is basically writing. And the French quickly are able to actually translate the work. And the person that basically translates the work, the initial partial translation, is a chap called Sylvester de Sacy. Sylvester de Sacy is a linguist. Is a polyglot. Not only does he have access to the Arabic language, he has access to another, multiple languages. In fact, de Sacy's student is basically tasked with translating all the key texts, written by the Muslims, during the medieval Muslim Empire. Yeah, we know that when Napoleon basically went to Egypt, he was really interested in translating a great deal of, the writings, the Muslim writings at that particular period. Yeah. So de Sacy translates Ibn Khaldun's kind of Muqaddimah. Yeah. And we know that Auguste Comte is the founding father, in inverted commas, of modern sociology. So Auguste Comte has access to that. So can you see how Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah actually enters France and is basically influencing the way in which sociology is actually basically kind of thought of. The other key, a famous figure within the sociology is a chap called Durkheim. Yeah. Now Durkheim's student was actually Taha Hussein. Taha Hussein's PhD was on Ibn Khaldun. Yeah. So we know that the French writers who were basically thinking of contemporary notions of sociology had direct access, direct influences of his works. The other thing that's quite interesting is that the English translations, there's a number of partial translations of Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah. The early translation basically happens through Nicholson. The Nicholson is the famous chap that basically translates Rumi's Mathnavi. We know there's another Orientalist by the name of Charles Isawi. He basically has a partial translation of Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah. It's still quite easily for you to actually, buy through Amazon or various other places. But it's basically Francis Rosenthal that basically sits down and does the entire translation. Yeah, I think it takes him at least a good A solid 3 years, I think it takes him. But you know how long it took Ibn Khaldun to write the Muqaddimah? You won't believe it. It took him 6 months to write it. Yeah, but it takes someone 3 years to actually translate the entire corpus. So you can see the level of scholarship that people are actually kind of hitting at. Yep. How are we doing for time? Okay, so right. So the third thing about Ibn Khaldun is that he's a political advisor. Yeah. Can we push it to 1/2 Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So the third thing that we know about Ibn Khaldun is that he's a political advisor to a number of leading kind of dynasties. Yeah. So if you're familiar with like the North African history, you will basically find that it was the Hafsids, it was the Marinids, it was the Nasirids, it was the Mamluks. So there's a competing kind of empires, if you like, that was basically ruling North Africa. And Ibn Khaldun was a key advisor to a number of these, of the sultans and the caliphates, of that time. So what basically Ibn Khaldun is basically doing, and this is really, really crucial, is that he's taking all his reading, he's taking all his basically expertise as a political advisor, and he puts that into writing. Yeah. So the thing about Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah is this. He's basically looking at society as it is, not as it ought to be. And that's a fundamental kind of shift. Yeah, because one of the things that we teach the class of sociology is that look, we have to look at society how it is, yeah, warts and all, yeah, not necessarily how it ought to be. So that's the first really important contribution that basically Ibn Khaldun basically makes. The second key area that he basically looks on is his approach to history, and this is quite profound, if you like. I was having this coffee with one of my PhD students, and he was interested in the context of the book, and I was basically talking about how Ibn Khaldun basically approaches history, and I was just looking at his face and his jaw dropped, and he basically said, which century was this chap writing? I said he was writing in the 15th century. Yeah. So some of his ideas are very, very contemporary. Yeah. So the first contemporary idea that basically has is that most of history that was basically written before Ibn Khaldun, it was glorification of like kings and queens and documenting history. Yeah. So it's documenting history. Ibn Khaldun basically moved away from that. He basically wanted to theorize history. He's trying to make sense of history. Well, what does that tell us about history? What does that actually signify? What is the meaning behind that, etc.? So he terms this idea of thinking historically. So you look at the material and you not necessarily describe the social world, but rather you basically have a critical understanding of the key events and you try and make sense of what those key events basically kind of symbolize. Yeah. So that's the thing that Ibn Khaldun is basically kind of, is doing. Yeah. And it's quite interesting when you pick up Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, the first couple of pages, he's taking on the big hitters like Al-Masudi and all these big kind of historians. He's basically saying this is not history. This is basically just what's the word? You're basically spreading gossip from one generation to another generation to another generation. Yeah, that's not real history. Real history is basically you take a step back and you basically analyze the sources. Well, where did these sources come from? Yeah. Does the numbers basically add up? Yeah. Well, what is it about history that we can actually kind of collaborate? Are there various other evidences that we can actually basically take that allows us actually to make sense? Once we've done that, you basically take a step back and you try and make sense of what historical events kind of represent, if you like. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that his contribution is in terms of knowledge. I mean, I think that's a really big area of his contribution. So there's a couple of things that I can actually reflect on that. I mean, he has a classification of knowledge, yeah, and the classification of knowledge is basically done in 3 ways. He basically talks about the religious sciences, yeah, or he calls it the traditional sciences. Then he moves on to the intellectual sciences, and then he has a discussion on forbidden knowledge. That I find is really, really interesting, yeah, because the study of ignorance, I mean, there's a whole genre of literature that's basically come out on the back of like fake news and deep fake, etc., is a study of ignorance, yeah, And there, I think, you can actually see how Ibn Khaldun's kind of a penetrative kind of, knowledge actually comes in. Because we can't actually take all knowledge as, to have the same kind of, the value, if you like, or the same, the same currency. If you had a longer session, we could have kind of, taken a deep dive in relation to, like, say, for example, fake news, and the knowledge, extracted from that. The other area, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. If you're interested, it's there on page 78. It's really, really profound. He basically says knowledge can be, new knowledge. Yeah. So when I'm assessing a PhD student, yeah, I'm basically saying, well, what is your unique contribution to knowledge? Yeah. Ibn Khaldun's writing this, in the 15th century. He's basically saying that you have to come up with new science. Ibn Khaldun came up with sociology as a new science. Yeah. You have to provide new interpretation to ideas. Yeah. Or you have to kind of offer corrections. Yeah. Improvement to a particular kind of science. That's the other thing that he's basically talking about. Yeah. Abridgment of ideas or literary criticism. These are very contemporary. You run these 7 points at any university, whether it be, English department or economics department or a history department or a sociology department. Yeah. People's jaw will drop and they'll think, which century was this chap writing? What, in the 15th century? And he's coming up with these, these ideas. Yeah. So finally, the other key area is, I'm not going to go into great detail because it's going to take me more than 5 minutes, is this idea of cyclical theory. He's basically taking a step back and saying, look, all this knowledge, all these observations, political observation, all this political infighting that's basically, he's actually observed. He's trying to take a step back. He's trying to make sense of all of that. Yeah. So he's basically coming up with a theory, a novel theory, that basically helps explain the rise and decline of civilizations. Yeah. And he calls it the cyclical theory. So in other words, that each civilization, has a starting point. It grows. Yeah. So the first generation, or the pioneer generation, yeah, they inject new ideas, new resources into it. Yeah. And they have solidarity, which he basically terms asabiya. Yeah, that's the first generation. Second generation are able to actually build and develop upon the first generation. Yeah. The third generation are so disconnected from the first generation that they basically take the luxuries for granted. Yeah. So they're not necessarily contributing towards anything new. By the time you get to the fourth generation, everything is actually lost. Yeah, is actually in decline. And he basically says that, the cyclical theory basically repeats itself. Yeah, so in order for you to actually make sense of civilization. And you can apply that to the Romans, you can apply that to the Greeks, you can apply that to the Venetians, whichever historical location that you basically want to see, whether the Mughals or the Ottomans, you can apply that cyclical theory of decline, rise and decline, if you like. So 27 minutes, I do hope that I've made justice to the topic. If not, it'll definitely create some debates, discussions, clarifications. So, if you...
Thank you so much, Dr. Shamim. That was really helpful, brief, but also at the same time comprehensive insight into the contribution of Genius of Ibn Khaldun. I think we're opening up to question and answers. Please.
So, the first time I heard about Ibn Khaldun was from my cousin who was studying for a civil service exam in Pakistan. And the question was, can you name the book, the Ibn Khaldun book? And everybody ticked Muqaddimah, which was obviously not correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's something I've never forgotten in terms of it. I had sort of a two-part sort of question. And the first one was that you mentioned about the Ottoman use of or reading of Ibn Khaldun's work. And I was thinking how they saw it in context of their own transition at that point in terms of what people would call the decline theory of the Ottoman Empire. And the second was generally speaking about decline theory as something which seems to have fallen out of favor nowadays, particularly reference to certain empires. But it's also equally referenced a lot in modern context in terms of the USA, for instance, in terms of their position in the world.
Yeah,
China.
that's really good. Yeah.
So how do you see that sort of?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Theory and Ibn Khaldun's defined so much by that decline and regeneration point?
That's a very interesting question. So the Ottoman side, I mean, I'm a sociologist. I'm not an Ottoman historian, so I can't actually help you, answer that question. But I can obviously pinpoint you to some kind of, reference work. It's a chap like Leeds University, Mustafa Sheikh. I mean, he'll definitely be able to actually answer that question because he's a more kind of Ottoman historian. But I can actually answer the second part of your question because it's more to do with like kind of sociology and what have you. So the decline theory, you're right, the decline theory has actually kind of lost currency when it comes to both sociology and political science, yeah, until recently. Because one of the things that we're basically observing now is the decline of the West. Yeah, I mean, it's not, you don't necessarily have to take my kind of a point, but you do a sift of literature, you will basically find that, the West is actually in decline, yeah. Now, one of the critiques of Ibn Khaldun, so if, for example, if I was doing this presentation, say like 5 years ago, in fact, before Brexit, like 10 years ago, if that for that matter, most of the people will say, well, Ibn Khaldun's idea is flawed because the Western civilization, yeah, has actually grown. Yeah, and it's actually grown from, say, for example, colonization onwards. You saw a slight dip after the First World War, but that didn't necessarily translate into, you had a shift away from, let's say, for example, Britain, and the shift kind of went towards the kind of across the, the Atlantic. It went to, the United States. But as we speak now, there's been a great interest in Ibn Khaldun's kind of idea, especially in terms of understanding the decline of, say, for example, the Western civilization and Western society. Yeah, there's plenty. I mean, if you do a quick literature search, I mean, it doesn't take an Einstein to actually figure that one out. Yeah.
Please, first start and we'll come back to you.
Just about what's the view about how the West views Ibn Khaldun. Generally, we have a problem that is a failure to acknowledge Islamic contributions. But it seems with him, it's more positive, especially in recent times. There's more of a recognition of the works and how relevant they are.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but alhamdulillah, I've read all books on Ibn Khaldun. I've got them in my house, so I know the literature. I couldn't actually delve into the journal articles. This is no joke, there are thousands and thousands of journal articles on Ibn Khaldun. Yeah. Out of all the figures, bar Imam al-Ghazali, I would basically say that Ibn Khaldun actually kind of comes up right at the top. Maybe Ibn Sina might actually come up right at the top as well. Now, the thing about Ibn Khaldun is that it has kind of a currency. They're basically using his ideas as a way of making sense of the Muslim society. They're using his ideas as a way of making sense of North African society. I mean, if you have an idea of how the rise and decline of civilization basically starts, and the way in which he basically talks about not necessarily how society ought to be, but rather how society is, you can basically weaponize that information. Yeah, that's quite easily basically done. Why else basically send out anthropologists? Why else send out sociologists? Why out basically employ anthropologists and sociologists? Working for the FBI or various intelligence agency. We know that when it comes to the war in Afghanistan, you had anthropologists basically advising kind of governments. Why? Because they've got that local knowledge, yeah, and you can actually basically weaponize that kind of knowledge, for your for your advantage, if you like. So there's that kind of you take in his ideas because you have a certain kind of what's the word now? Certain kind of way in which you can actually take advantage. But the other reason why Ibn Khaldun is basically quite popular isn't because suddenly like Department of Sociology at the University of Manchester have woken up one day and say, look, there's this sociologist called Ibn Khaldun, let's see what he has to kind of offer. It wasn't, say for example Du Bois. the famous black sociologists, who were basically corresponding with Max Weber. I mean, I went through my entire university education, yeah? Not even a single professor basically made reference to W.E.B. Du Bois. But yet still, he was actually basically corresponding with Weber. So the point is that change has actually largely come about because Muslims academics have basically sat down and be able to actually ask profound questions to say that, look, this is our heritage. We need you to actually acknowledge that. In the same way, the feminist writers have basically said, look, there are feminist, sociologists that have not been recognized. So, there's a push towards that. And I'm grateful that, if you read Anthony Giddens' recent a sociology textbooks that's basically used as an standard A-level text, there's a section there on Ibn Khaldun. It's not a small section, but nevertheless, at least whoever's basically studying sociology, Muslims in particular, or non-Muslims for that matter, they're saying, oh, wow, okay, this is quite interesting. Yeah.
Is it follow on?
Yeah, just on that last point on Giddens, actually. First of all, thank you so much for the contribution. That's fascinating to hear about the passion. It sounds like you're on a bit of a crusade in terms of the heritage and the knowledge and ensuring that people recognise that for our current generations. How are you finding, because I know you're teaching this now in university, how are you finding the response from your work at the moment? Yeah. And secondly, the Giddens reference there, when I did A-level sociology a long time ago, it certainly wasn't there. That was a very recent addition to something. Perhaps is that part of your contribution as well?
No, no. I think that's largely to do with the works of Farid al-Attas and various other people like that, who have devoted their entire life to the Ibn Khaldun. And there's so many other biographies that have actually kind of come up. And on the back of decolonization, decolonizing curriculum, decolonizing the universities, etc. People are actually looking at alternative worldviews as well. So that's definitely definitely there. Now the question I like to I don't teach Islamic studies. I teach sociology, and one of my master's module is actually on research methodology. Yeah. And along with Avicenna, I throw Ibn Khaldun's name, but I don't say Ibn Khaldun. I'll give him full title. I'll say Muhammad Ibn Khaldun. I kind of emphasize on that, because otherwise people think Ibn Khaldun. Because we don't. It's only Muslims that'll be able to actually pick up. Because like I said, he's basically saying when it comes to research, you have to observe the society how it is, and he basically gives you crystal kind of methodological tools of how to basically study sociology. And the whole kind of real novel thing is that he's not. Because I'm just a sociologist. I don't have any training in Islamic studies. Yeah. But he does. It's remarkable. He's a Maliki jurist. Yeah. When he goes to in Egypt, he's a Maliki jurist. He's teaching in Al-Azhar. People are coming for fatwas. So he's maybe just doing this on the side. He's probably thinking as a side hobby, I think I might just write this kind of magnus opus, and we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Great, exactly. I'll come back to you. Please.
I've got two questions. Number one is Robert Irwin's book, which came out a couple of years ago. What's your take on it? I read it. I'll leave that for you.
Yeah.
The second question is the cyclic theory. I find that really fascinating.
Yeah.
But if you apply that in a different context, the context of, let's say, post-Second World War, British South Asian Muslims coming to the UK, first generation, Asabiya, second generation, carrying on the message, third generation, Angus Beef from the
And God knows for
in the context of continuing on with the Islamic identity within the issue.
So first question. Sorry, I shouldn't be pointing. Sorry. So Robin Irwin. I don't like Robin Irwin's book because Robin Irwin's book basically comes out of a certain way of doing history that's been quite fashionable within the West, and that's basically post-structuralism. So you basically take certain individuals and you basically deconstruct them. That's the in thing at the moment now. And what Robert Irwin basically does, I mean, I think he does a great disservice in deconstructing kind of Ibn Khaldun's work. There's been various other works that's been kind of come out as well, and you're thinking, where on earth do you get these evidences from? So, like a recent book, it really escapes my memory. It was serialized for the BBC. The author goes, during the latter part of his life, he goes to Cairo, and apparently he's being entertained by dancing girls. I'm thinking, where do you get this, information from? He's got this issue with, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He's writing, there and back. He's basically, teaching at, Al-Azhar and various other, madrasas. He's not got no time to be entertained by notch girls. So, I mean, sometimes you think, where on earth do these individuals actually come from? So this is where I think, as Muslim communities, we really need to actually sharpen our kind of fountain pens and basically say, look, this is, we need to take ownership of our own heritage. And the cyclical theory, brother, you are 100% absolutely bang on. Yeah. You think that we've got problems now, you wait till you get to the third generation if Ibn Khaldun's cyclical theory actually kind of works. The first generations of, they're very pioneers, yeah. The second generation, they're basically reaping the reward. By the time you get to the third generation, people don't want to work. Yeah. And by the time you get to the fourth, society. And the thing about the cyclical theory is that you have another rise. It's not, because it does read as a declinist, pessimistic theory. But I would say that's basically one part of reading of Ibn Khaldun. Because there is growth, there is energy. Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. So Ibn Khaldun talks about generation. He defines a generation as 40. So like one generation, 40 years, second generation is 40 years, etc. I think the most commentators that they've come across, they don't necessarily take that 40 years as literal. Yeah, they take 40 as signifying, many, if you like. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'll come back to you, please.
Yeah, so my question was, you mentioned Peter Burke, sociology of knowledge, and polymath in Muslim societies. As a sociologist, when you looked at a particular period in Muslim society, say the Ibn Khaldun time, what were the conditions that produced polymath in Muslim society? And is that unique to Muslim society as well? And then if that theory of decline is cyclical theory, and then if that be cross-applied to, say, Charles Moore, who predicted the transistors doubling every 2 years, the speed for the transistor capacity, and it still held true. So if it was a polymathic approach, how could you cross-apply those theories? I don't know, just something.
Okay, inshallah. Yeah, so, the thing that I didn't have time is for me to go into Ibn Khaldun's views on schooling. That's really fascinating. We had a conversation just outside with Maulana Sahib about schooling. Ibn Khaldun is basically anti-schooling. Yeah. So to answer your question, how do you basically generate polymaths? You basically generate polymaths by having one-to-one kind of teaching. Yeah, that's basically how you generate, because you can instill this idea of love of learning. Most of the time we kind of spend a great deal of time in teaching kids about biology, chemistry, physics, etc. Yeah, that's it's the wrong way. Ibn Khaldun basically says once you've basically instilled a love of learning for that individual, yeah, everything is, you've actually achieved everything. Yeah. So the reason why he's critical of schooling is basically he says that schooling has become institutionalized. And schooling has been institutionalized and politicized. Yeah. Now you have to, wallahi, I can't stress, if you're familiar with the literature on education, you think, what? This is like contemporary discourse. You're talking about Charles Dewey, you're talking about, Emile kind of Rousseau and various kind of contemporary, not contemporary, European kind of thinking where these ideas actually originate at a historical moment of time. But Ibn Khaldun was writing about this, 500 years ago. And you see that in India. So what does Modi basically do, when he's taken up? He basically changes the history curriculum. Yeah. Conversely, also during the what's the brother called, Erdogan in Turkey, where he basically takes away, the kind of Ataturk kind of heritage. He basically puts in, pro kind of Ottoman, because history is really important. Yeah. I would basically say that, that's where you start. You can have, your secular learning, but as long as you continue that kind of individual kind of learning on your own, with someone, with a teacher, that's invaluable. I would basically say. So we knew. So what's the problem? The problem is the institutions. So when you study social science, you go to the Department of Social Science, which is separate from the Department of Sciences. That's Aristotelian kind of logic, if you like. You're separating the disciplines. When Ibn Khaldun was actually writing, or Ibn Sina, they don't necessarily see that in that kind of binary way. Yeah, it's all kind of integrated, if you like. So it has to kind of come down to at the level of epistemology, of how we basically know what we know. You got to deconstruct epistemology and basically say, look, we need polymathic thinkers. We don't necessarily need, individuals who basically just know one text. We know people that need to know the multiple text. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I know quite a few hands are up.
Yeah.
Please, yeah.
I just have a question on the making of Ibn Khaldun and how we can produce Ibn Khalduns in our time. We've spoken a lot about all these great thinkers in the past, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and others. But in your own study of Ibn Khaldun, the making of Ibn Khaldun, and the issues of knowledge in our current society, what do you think ought to be done for us to create more thinkers like this?
Yeah. So that's a really good question, actually. So Ibn Khaldun doesn't, because like most scholars are associated with certain kind of schools. Yeah. So you have, alumni of Oxford University, alumni of Cambridge University. Ibn Khaldun was basically, he had one teacher, Al-Ibli. He came to his house, lived with him. Yeah, because Ibn Khaldun came from a very rich family. He's very kind of royalty stock, if you like. People can afford to bring a famous kind of teacher to stay with you. Yeah. So that's basically, that's how, you nurture. His grandfathers basically entertained scholars and guests. So from a very, very young age, he's a sponge. Minds are fresh. You're taking, even if you sat in the corner and someone's talking about Futuhat al-Makkiyah, you think, right, okay, he's not going to understand. But there's certain things that he might actually kind of internalize. Yeah, and how, respect is actually given to people of ilm, people of knowledge. And for Ibn Khaldun, people of knowledge wasn't just, the ulama, it was their poets as well, the Sufis, the scientists. So they had a more kind of, eclectic kind of, inclusive kind of idea of what knowledge and scholarship basically meant. And I think, we need to start. And I say this is, you mentioned this morning. This is a problem, major problem. Because I see this, I say to my students, I said, look, if you want knowledge, don't go to this device. If you want knowledge, go to the library. If you want information, go to this device. Information, you go to your smartphones or your computers. Knowledge doesn't actually reside in this. Knowledge actually resides in books. But if you want wisdom, there's no point going to the library. You've got to sit down with individual. That's where you begin to actually pick up, hikmah. You're not going to get wisdom from, reading 100 books. It's not going to come. Yeah. So and unfortunately, the first thing that you are given when you go to school is this. So we got to deconstruct. We got to deconstruct learning, and we got to, we have to start afresh. Yeah.
Get one last one.
Can you outline Ibn Khaldun's hallmarks of decline? Okay, what does he state? And also, Dr. Junaid spoke this morning about this great, I don't know if he uses this word, but the monoculture of the world, right? And the world is historically, in my opinion, you may disagree with me, in a slightly unique position in that if you think about the sort of the economic structures that we have, they're almost sort of ubiquitous, right? Pretty much across the world, right? Where do you see that decline? You're talking about the decline in the West. So, what are the hallmarks of decline? Where do you think this decline in the West is? And if broadly the whole world is moving in the same direction?
I think it's going to be a long conversation, but in a nutshell, what Ibn Khaldun basically says is that decline is linked with asabiya. Asabiya is basically group solidarity. When you basically have group solidarity which is actually fractured, that basically starts with this idea of decline. Yeah. So thinking politically now at a more of a macro level, you say to me, where is the decline in West? It doesn't take a genius to figure out whether or not the Western asabiya actually hands. If it's there. I mean, at a UK level, at least with the European Union, there was a sense of European asabiya. That's no longer there as well. Yeah, we saw COVID that basically, we had vaccine nationalism actually kick in. So although this idea of asabiya was actually projected, but as soon as COVID hit, everybody actually didn't start looking outward; they started looking, inward. So that's another kind of decline, if you like. The asabiya, the decline of asabiya, and you've got NATO as well. I mean, NATO actually fractured during the Bosnian War. If anybody's actually I've travelled to Bosnia. That's how I became developed an interest in Islam, is by looking at what actually happened with the Bosnian Muslims, and look, the Bosnian genocide basically happened when NATO was actually there. NATO was actually overlooking the genocide, if you like. So the decline thesis, the decline, the asabiya has been there. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, like say, for example, what's the chap that's basically just turned 100? Kissinger, Henry Kissinger. Read Kissinger's work. Yeah. This is just it's because you see the thing is that we don't necessarily read no more. We think we kind of scroll from one Facebook page to another, and we think that we're kind of accumulating knowledge, but no, I mean, I'll give you one example. If you look at the white working class, yeah. Now, if you pick up a book, I forget the actual author's name. I think the surname is Rosen. It's called The Intellectual Lives of the British Working Class. The Intellectual Lives of the British Working Class. The question that he asks is, what did the British working class do before the introduction of radio and television? They read. I think this was before schooling became compulsory, because they had a quest of knowledge. And what did they read? What did they memorize? They memorized Shakespeare. Yeah. So it's not. I mean, there's a difference between schooling and knowledge. These are separate. You can actually accumulate knowledge without actually going to school. Classical example is Malcolm X. Where did he get his knowledge from? He got it in the prison. He didn't necessarily graduate from, Harvard or Yale or anything like that. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm just rambling on. Do apologize.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Shamim Miah. That was really insightful and also very engaging and conversation, should I say, about glimpses into the life of Ibn Khaldun and his work. You can see how relevant it is to our present society, from schooling to asabiya, which was very mildly translated as group solidarity. It could be a stronger word to perhaps translate that into and help us to reflect on what's going around. Wish we had more time to hear you, but thank you for your passionate presentation on that. And also the book is available in the main hall, and that leads me to the announcement that actually, can I direct everyone to the main hall for the raffle, which will take place as soon as you get there, 5:35. Hope you're going to hold it back until we get there. And then also there's a final presentation